You know, when we think about history, we often picture these grand battles, these huge political movements. But the real story, the human story, well, that's found in the lives of the people who actually lived through it. Today, we're going to trace one of those remarkable journeys, a personal story of World War II, all through the eyes of a young Londoner named Ellen Allen.
So, this is really the big question at the heart of it all. We're about to see how these massive, world-changing events can shape a single life, turning what should have been an ordinary childhood into something, well, something both tragic and absolutely extraordinary.
So here she is. Meet Ellen Rosemary Allen, born in South Kensington, London, back on June 22, 1922. The world she was born into was still recovering from the Great War, but nobody knew that it was on the brink of another even bigger conflict. And what's so amazing is that this entire account comes directly from an autobiography she wrote years later.
Every story of great change seems to start with a sense of normalcy, right? For Ellen, her early life in Brixton was filled with all the simple joys of a typical childhood. You know, playing in the park with friends, borrowing books from the local library. But this ordinary world, it was about to be completely shattered.
Tragedy struck, and not just once. When she was only 6 years old, her father died of double pneumonia. Just 4 years after that, her mother passed away from pleurisy. As Ellen points out in her own writing, both of her parents were only 38 years old, and they died from illnesses that today could be easily cured. So by 1933, at just 10 years old, she was an orphan.
And wow, Ellen's own words just capture the finality of it all. Her whole world, an entire chapter of her life was just over. And she wasn't even a teenager yet.
After her mother's funeral, everything, and I mean everything, changed. With her old life completely gone, Ellen went to live with her aunt and uncle, and she had to face a totally new and unfamiliar world.
And the change was just so dramatic. She went from the old Victorian streets of Brixton, right in the heart of the city, to a modern house in Edgware, which was a new suburb popping up on the outskirts. It was a completely different side of England, and really a symbol of her completely different life. And this is where you just have to admire her incredible resilience. Right in the middle of all that grief, after having to miss 2 full weeks of school, she still managed to pass a really critical scholarship exam. That one test opened the door to a higher education, an opportunity that, back then, very few people had. So just as she was starting to find her footing again, this new, much larger shadow began to fall over Europe. The personal tests of her childhood were about to be replaced by the ultimate test for her entire generation, the Second World War. And then, the day came. Ellen was at her first job, working as an invoice typist. And like most people, she heard the news on the radio. War with Germany wasn't just some threat anymore, it was now a reality. The impact was immediate, and it was total. I mean, everybody was issued a gas mask that you had to carry with you all the time. The blackout plunged the entire country into darkness every single night. These huge barrage balloons, they looked like giant rubber blimps, were floating over London to try and stop air attacks. Rationing began, and men were being drafted. Life was just transformed, almost overnight. In the summer of 1940, things were looking really bleak. France had fallen, the army had just been evacuated from Dunkirk, and Britain stood all alone. Ellen remembers how Winston Churchill's voice on the radio just rallied the whole nation with speeches just like this one. It was a moment of pure defiance, when it looked like an invasion was almost certain.
Think about this for a second. The blackout, where every single window had to be covered, every car headlight taped over, lasted for nearly 6 years. Can you imagine that? 6 years of this oppressive, forced darkness, night after night.
So, Ellen was just 17, but she was eager to do her part. She actually tried to enlist in the army, but was told she was too young. But she wasn't deterred. She found another way to contribute to the war effort, a less direct way, but a critically important one.
She got a job as a news typist for the BBC monitoring service. Now, this was a top-secret operation. It was basically the ears of the British government. They had refugees and foreign nationals from all over Europe working in shifts, listening to broadcasts from enemy countries, piecing together vital intelligence. So here's how this whole intelligence pipeline worked. First, the monitors listened in. Then, the translators did their thing. And then, it all came to typists like Ellen. She would type all this information onto stencils, which were then used to print a daily 200-page news digest. By 9 a.m. the next morning, that intel was on the desk of every single government department. And while she was doing this vital work, life back home was defined by scarcity. I mean, just look at these rations. 8 ounces of sugar,
2 ounces of butter, and just 1 egg per week. And as Ellen remembers it, there were no bananas in all of Britain for 6 years.
Then, on December 7, 1941, Ellen and her colleagues heard the news about Pearl Harbor. And her reflection here just captures this incredible mix of feelings. It was a shock, of course, but she says it was also very welcome news because it meant they weren't alone anymore. It was the first real, concrete hope they had of actually winning.
Okay, so the tide of the war is finally turning, and at the same time, Ellen's personal life is about to take a dramatic turn too. After all those years of struggle and darkness, the end was finally in sight. And with it came the promise of a new life and a reward she never expected.
The final chapter of the war just unfolded so fast. On D-Day, Ellen remembers seeing the sky just filled with planes and gliders. Later that year, she's at a dance and meets an American flight officer named Eddie Allen. By May 1945, there's victory in Europe. Then victory over Japan in August. And just 6 months after that, she's on a plane to America to marry him.
Her description of VE Day in London is just incredible. The city went wild. She joined these massive crowds in Trafalgar Square, and she described it as being like New York's Eve at Times Square, only many times bigger. It was this huge collective release from 6 long years of fear and hardship.
And this is where her wartime story comes to a close. From an orphan in Brixton to a secret intelligence typist, she survived the war and she found love. Her journey across the Atlantic to Miami was a journey to, as she puts it, a whole new world, where the next chapter of her life was about to begin.
You know, Ellen's story is such a powerful reminder that behind all the big statistics and the famous dates of history, there are millions of individual lives. Each one is a complete story of loss, of resilience, and of hope. And it makes you wonder, right? How many other stories are out there, waiting in the pages of an old family memoir, ready to change how we see the past?